You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
The Brazilian state of Ceará is one of the poorer regions of Brazil. The GDP per capita is just a third of that of the people in the state of Sao Paulo, and not even a fifth of those in the district around the capital of Brasilia. Nevertheless, the state in the north of the country went through two economic booms, one connected to rubber production in the Amazon, the other to a cotton boom in the 19th century, when the American Civil War saw cotton production in the US decline. Nevertheless, reliance on slave labor in the state was limited, to the extent that the state abolished slave labor 4 years before the country as a whole did in 1888. Earlier, Ceará had already seen political rumblings throughout the century. On several occasions, part of the state had declared itself independent from the imperial government, including through the Confederation of the Equator, in which the state of Pernambuco also played a role. Somewhat famously, the town of Crato in the south of the state at some point was an independent country for a full day in 1817. The capital of Pernambuco, Recife, had earlier, of course, been the center of Dutch Brazil. During what eventually turned out to be the tail end of the Dutch colonial occupation, the Dutch had started casting an eye on some of the Brazilian hinterland and became responsible for the founding of Fortaleza, the capital of the state. Or rather, whether they founded Fortaleza is up for some debate. The Dutch West India Company, driven by ambitions of trade and territorial control, had taken large swaths of northeastern Brazil from the Portuguese during the 1630s and 1640s. By 1649, the Dutch also eyed the relatively underpopulated region of Ceará, eager to secure its coastline and rumored mineral wealth. Led by Matthias Beck, Dutch forces arrived in what is now Fortaleza and began construction of a new fortification, ignoring an abandoned construction earlier erected by the Portuguese. The new structure was named Fort Schonenborg in honor of Dutch West India Company president in Recife, Wouter Schonenborg. Its pentagonal design with bastions and palisades was engineered by the Englishman Richard Carr and, at least in part, built using materials salvaged from the earlier Portuguese fort. The fort very much existed on the periphery of Dutch Brazil, and subsistence farming and trade with indigenous communities were the hallmarks of survival on the edge of the Dutch Empire. Then, when the Dutch were about to leave the country in agreement with the Portuguese, in early 1654, local Amerindians besieged the fort, though the Dutch were saved by freshly arriving Portuguese. The Dutch, under Matthias Beck, handed over the fort, were carried off by ship, supposedly the last Dutch to leave the country, and were taken to the island of Barbados. Soon after, the fort was renamed to Forte de Nossa Senhora de Assunção, and, now heavily refurbished and rebuilt, still stands today. The city of Fortaleza, the name directly referring to the fort itself, sprang up around the fort, though virtually no parts of the original construction remain. Beck eventually passed away on the Dutch island of Curaçao, a colony to this day, while governor of the island. Fort Schonenborg was built on the remains of an earlier abandoned settlement, so arguably with constant habitation since, it was the Dutch who founded the current city of Fortaleza. But the question of the city's founding, whether it was Catholic or Protestant, remains a minor topic of debate among historians, reflecting the layered history of the fort, the city that grew around it, but also of the history of the Brazilian Northeast as a whole. Some argue that Fortaleza was fundamentally founded by the Dutch in 1649 under Protestant leadership, and that this moment constitutes the city's true origin. Others maintain that the definitive founding occurred in 1654, when the Portuguese, re-establishing Catholic rule, gave the fort and the city its current name and institutional framework. While the name Fortaleza comes from the Portuguese era, the physical structure and first sustained European occupation were Dutch. Both periods left lasting marks on the identity of the region, even if the Catholic legacy ultimately dominated public institutions and place names, and while it certainly was the Portuguese presence in Ceará which primarily shaped the area and the capital. Today, Fortaleza de Nossa Senhora de Assunção houses the headquarters of the 10th Military Region of the Brazilian Army and seemingly reaches for its origins to a period before the Dutch presence. The fort houses a statue of Martim Soares Moreno, considered the founder of the state of Ceará and who participated in the fight against the Dutch. In Ceará in 1624 and 1625, he repelled the attacks of 2 Dutch ships, then partook in the fighting against the Dutch in Pernambuco and Rio Grande do Norte, before also playing a role in permanently expelling the Dutch in the 1650s. Part of the fort still follows the contours of the original Dutch construction, but little, if anything, remains of the Dutch presence in Fortaleza, save perhaps for the occasional appearance of the common Brazilian surname da Holanda. Also the last name of a young woman selling excellent cakes and pastries on the city's main seaside boulevard, a few stone throws away from the fort. Katia de Holanda perhaps underscores what is important in this country of light, as the state is also known as. The good life, whatever the GDP per capita, is lived on the seashore with sand, sea and sunshine, cake and caipirinha at your fingertips.